There is an asset more valuable than gold, more durable than diamonds, and more powerful than any army. It cannot be found on a balance sheet, it cannot be measured by conventional accounting, and yet it is the single greatest source of long-term wealth the world has ever known. This asset is not a physical thing, it's not a factory, a patent, or a piece of real estate. It is a small parcel of real estate in the most valuable territory on earth, the human mind. The world's most powerful asset is a brand. It is the simple, unshakable idea of Coca-Cola on a hot day. It is the intuitive trust you place in an American Express card when you are thousands of miles from home. It is the emotional connection that makes you choose a box of See's candies for a loved one, not because it's the cheapest chocolate, but because it is the right chocolate. Warren Buffett, the most successful investor in history, did not build his fortune on complex algorithms or speculative technologies. He built it on a profound understanding of this one simple truth. While Wall Street chased fleeting trends and built elaborate financial models to predict the unpredictable, Buffett was focused on the one thing that almost never changes: human nature. He understood that a business that has successfully branded itself has built an economic moat around its castle, not with bricks and mortar, but with loyalty, trust, and habit. This is a fortress that competitors find almost impossible to breach. And yet, this is the very principle that most investors, even seasoned professionals, get profoundly wrong. We are taught to look for what's new, what's disruptive, what's complicated. We mistake simplicity for a lack of sophistication. We see a company like Hershey's and think, it's just chocolate. How can that compete with artificial intelligence or gene editing? And in that moment of dismissal, we make the costliest mistake in all of investing. We underestimate the durability of the obvious. We sell our winners, the magnificent, wealth-compounding machines, far too early, trading a fortress for a lottery ticket. This journey we are about to embark on is a deep exploration of Buffett's final promise to the long-term investor. It is a financial transformation that will allow you to see the world through his eyes. You will gain a new and powerful appreciation for the immense, long-lasting value of intangible assets. You will learn to identify the handful of businesses whose brands grant them a license to print money for decades, and you will develop the conviction, the iron-willed patience, to buy them, hold them, and allow them to build your financial freedom. This isn't just another lesson in stock picking. This is a fundamental rewiring of how you perceive value. It's about learning to invest in the constants of human desire, and in doing so, to build a portfolio that can weather any storm and compound your wealth for a lifetime. At its core, the most powerful competitive advantage a business can possess is not a patent which expires or a low-cost production process which can be replicated. It is a mental monopoly. It is the ownership of a specific thought or feeling in the mind of the consumer. This is the economic moat of the mind. When a brand achieves this status, it transcends the mere function of its product and becomes a mental shortcut, a heuristic for quality, consistency, and trust. This mental real estate is the most fertile ground for long-term profit growth, yet it is an asset that most of the financial world systematically misunderstands and undervalues. To truly grasp its power, we must travel back to a moment of crisis, a time when a great American institution was brought to its knees, and a young Warren Buffett made one of the most audacious bets of his early career, not on financial statements, but on the resilience of an idea. The year was 1963, and the world of high finance was reeling from one of the most bizarre and audacious frauds in its history. It was called the Salad Oil Scandal. The story reads like a financial thriller. A small-time commodities trader in New Jersey named Tino DeAngelis had devised a brilliant scheme. His company, Allied Crude Vegetable Oil, supposedly stored massive quantities of salad oil in giant tanks in Bayonne, New Jersey. This oil served as collateral for huge loans from dozens of banks and financial firms, including a division of American Express. The problem was, the oil wasn't there. DeAngelis filled the tanks mostly with water, with only a thin layer of oil floating on top. When inspectors came, they would measure from the top, see oil, and sign off on the inventory. He had created a phantom asset worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In November 1963, the House of Cards collapsed. Allied Crude filed for bankruptcy, Tino DeAngelis was exposed, and the financial institutions that had loaned him money based on his phantom oil were facing catastrophic losses. Wall Street panicked. Among the hardest hit was American Express. Its warehousing subsidiary had issued receipts for the non-existent oil, and now Amex was on the hook for potentially more than its entire net worth. The stock plummeted. It was cut in half, falling from over $60 a share to $35. The consensus among the smart money, the supposed experts in executive decision-making, was that American Express was finished. The scandal had shattered its reputation for trust and security. How could a company responsible for travelers' checks and credit cards, products built entirely on the concept of financial integrity, ever recover from such a blow? It was, for all intents and purposes, a financial death sentence. But in Omaha, Nebraska, a 33-year-old Warren Buffett saw things differently. He wasn't looking at the headlines, he was looking at human behavior. He understood that a company's true value wasn't just the numbers on its balance sheet, but the space it occupied in the minds of its customers. So he did what he always does. He went out into the real world to conduct his own research. He didn't call other analysts or read Wall Street reports. He went to restaurants. He went to banks. He visited travel agencies. He talked to the people on the front lines, the merchants and the customers. And he asked a very simple question: has the scandal changed how you feel about American Express? The answer he found was a stunning revelation. Over and over again he heard the same thing. The merchants still gladly accepted the American Express card. In fact, many of them thought the card was somehow more prestigious than cash. The customers, when planning trips, were still lining up to buy American Express travelers' checks. They didn't connect the financial mess of a warehousing division in New Jersey with the green card in their wallet or the trusted traveler's checks in their pocket. The scandal was a Wall Street story, a complex financial drama that was utterly disconnected from the customer's reality. The brand, that powerful, simple idea of American Express means security and prestige when you travel, was completely intact. The moat of the mind was holding. Buffett realized that the market was making a classic mistake. It was conflating a temporary, solvable financial problem with a mortal wound to the core business. The fear and panic were focused on the headlines, while the underlying economic reality of the brand's power was being ignored. He concluded that the fear was irrational and the sell-off was a historic opportunity. He then made one of the most concentrated bets of his career, investing 40% of his partnership's assets, a staggering sum at the time, into American Express stock. His partners were nervous. The financial world thought he was insane. But Buffett was acting on a deeper truth. Within 2 years, as American Express settled the legal claims for far less than feared and the core business continued to thrive, the stock price more than tripled. The bet paid off magnificently, solidifying Buffett's reputation and providing a foundational lesson that would shape his entire philosophy. The most durable asset a company has is the trust and habit it has cultivated in its customers' minds. The brand was the business, and the business was stronger than ever. The American Express saga perfectly illuminates the psychological principle that underpins the power of great brands, the principle of cognitive ease. Our brains are fundamentally lazy. They are biological machines designed over millennia to conserve energy. Thinking is hard work. It consumes calories. Therefore, our minds have developed a vast array of mental shortcuts or heuristics to navigate the complexities of daily life without having to perform a full, rational analysis of every single decision. Cognitive ease is the state in which our brain operates on autopilot. Things that are familiar, simple, and easily processed feel true and good. Things that are complex, new, and require effort create cognitive strain. which feels uncomfortable and risky. A powerful brand is the ultimate tool for creating cognitive ease. Think about standing in a supermarket aisle, faced with dozens of choices for a simple product like ketchup. Your brain doesn't want to read every label, compare prices per ounce, and research the corporate history of each manufacturer. It's too much work. Instead, it scans for a familiar signal, a shortcut to a reliable decision. It sees the iconic shape of the Heinz bottle. In that split second, a cascade of associations fires off unconsciously. Heinz is ketchup. Ketchup is Heinz. I've had it 1,000 times. It's consistent. It's what my parents bought. It's a safe choice. The decision is made with almost zero conscious effort. Heinz has achieved cognitive ease. A competitor, even one with a slightly better product or a lower price, has to overcome the massive barrier of cognitive strain. A customer has to actively decide to take a risk, to try something new, to engage their analytical brain. Most of the time, they won't bother. This is magnified by another powerful bias: social proof. We are social creatures, wired to look to others for cues on how to behave. When we see that a brand is ubiquitous, that Coca-Cola is sold in every country on Earth, that iPhones are in the hands of millions of people around us, that McDonald's Golden Arches are a global landmark, it reinforces the brand's value and safety. The subconscious thought is, if everyone else is using it, it must be good. This creates a virtuous cycle. The more popular a brand becomes, the more social proof it generates, which in turn makes it an even easier and safer cognitive choice for new customers, further increasing its popularity. This is how a brand builds an almost unassailable market position. It's not just about advertising, it's about embedding itself so deeply into the culture and our mental wiring that choosing it becomes an automatic, effortless reflex. So how can you, as an investor or entrepreneur, translate this powerful psychological insight into a practical tool? You can use a mental model I call the mental share test. It's a 4-step process for evaluating the true strength of a brand's moat, moving beyond the numbers and into the mind of the consumer. Step 1 is the Category King test. It's deceptively simple. Pick a product or service category and ask yourself, what is the first name that comes to my mind? For search, it's Google. For coffee, it's Starbucks. For electric cars, it's Tesla. For streaming entertainment, it's Netflix. A company that is the reflexive, top-of-mind answer in its category has achieved an extraordinary level of mental dominance. This mental share is often a leading indicator of future market share and pricing power. If a company isn't the first or maybe the second name you think of, its moat is likely very shallow. Step 2 is the substitution test. Ask this critical question: if this brand were to disappear from the face of the earth tomorrow, would its customers genuinely miss it, or would they switch to a generic equivalent without a second thought? Would people mourn the loss of their local utility company? Unlikely. They would simply pay their bill to a new one. But if the iPhone disappeared, or if Coca-Cola vanished from every store shelf, there would be a genuine sense of loss. People have formed an emotional attachment to these products. The inability for a customer to find an acceptable substitute is the hallmark of a truly great brand. This irreplaceability is the source of immense long-term value. Step 3 is the pricing power litmus test. This is where the rubber meets the road financially. Can the company raise its prices by 5 to 10% year after year without losing a significant number of its customers? Look at their history. Has Disney been able to consistently increase ticket prices at its theme parks? Has Starbucks been able to charge more for a latte over time? Has Hermes been able to command ever higher prices for its Birkin bags? This ability to raise prices, often faster than the rate of inflation, is the single most powerful indicator of a durable competitive advantage. A company that must compete on price has no moat. A company that can dictate its own price has a fortress. Finally, step 4 is the global language test. Is the brand name, its logo, its core promise recognized and understood across different cultures, languages, and geographic borders? The McDonald's Golden Arches mean the same thing in Tokyo as they do in Toledo. The Nike swoosh is a universal symbol of athletic achievement. A brand that can transcend its home market and become a global icon has a much larger addressable market and a more diversified, resilient business. It has proven that its appeal is rooted in fundamental human desires, not just local cultural quirks. A business that passes all four of these tests is a business that likely has a deep and wide economic moat of the mind. The failure to appreciate this mental moat leads investors down the path of the 99%, the path of chasing fads instead of owning fortresses. The common mistake is to confuse temporary popularity with an enduring brand. A fad is a product or company that captures the public's imagination for a brief, intense period but lacks the deep roots of a true brand. Think of companies like Juicero, the infamous $700 Wi-Fi-connected juicer that was revealed to be completely useless. It generated immense media hype and venture capital funding, but it wasn't a brand. It was a gadget, a momentary curiosity. Or consider the countless fast fashion retailers that explode in popularity for a few years, only to be replaced by the next trend. They capture a moment in time, but they don't capture a permanent space in the consumer's mind. The 99% are drawn to these stories like moths to a flame. The narrative is exciting. It's about disruption, about changing the world, about explosive growth. They mistake this narrative for a competitive advantage. They buy the stock at the peak of the hype, only to see it collapse when the novelty wears off and the lack of a real, underlying brand moat is exposed. They are investing in skyrockets, hoping to ride them for a while, when the true path to wealth is to invest in the North Star, constant, reliable, and enduring. The contrast is stark. A fad is like a pop song that's #1 for a summer. A great brand is like the music of Beethoven. Its power and appeal endure for centuries. The critical error is believing that what is new and exciting is inherently more valuable than what is old and reliable. Buffett's entire career is a testament to the fact that the opposite is often true. The real, lasting value is found in the boring, the predictable, the companies that have become so ingrained in our daily lives that we barely even notice them anymore. That is the power of the economic moat of the mind. The financial manifestation of this mental moat is staggering, and it appears directly in a company's financial statements if you know where to look. A dominant brand directly translates into a superior financial structure. Let's compare two hypothetical companies, both selling coffee and both generating $1 billion in annual revenue. Company A is Fortress Coffee, a globally recognized brand like Starbucks. Company B is Generic Joe's, a company that sells coffee beans to supermarkets to be sold under private label brands. First, look at the top line, customer acquisition. Fortress Coffee doesn't have to spend nearly as much on marketing to get a new customer. Its stores are destinations. Its brand is a magnet that pulls people in. People actively seek it out. Generic Joe's, on the other hand, has to fight for every single sale. It has a sales team constantly negotiating with grocery chains, offering discounts and promotional allowances just to get on the shelf. This means Fortress Coffee's sales, general and administrative (SG&A) expenses as a percentage of revenue are significantly lower. Next, and most importantly, is pricing power, which shows up in gross margin. Fortress Coffee can charge $5 for a latte that costs maybe 50 cents in raw ingredients. Its brand allows it to command a massive premium. Its gross margin might be 60% or higher. Generic Joe's has zero pricing power. It is in a commodity business. The grocery store chains squeeze it for the lowest possible price. Its gross margin might be 20% on a good day. Let's do the math. On $1 billion in revenue, Fortress Coffee, with a 60% gross margin, generates $600 million in gross profit. Generic Joe's, with a 20% margin, generates only $200 million. That's a $400 million difference right there. Flowing directly from the power of the brand, this immense gross profit gives Fortress Coffee the resources to invest in better stores, better technology, and reinforcing its brand, further widening its moat. Generic Joe's is trapped in a cycle of low prices and low profits, with no money to invest in building a brand of its own. Finally, this all flows down to the ultimate measure of a great business: free cash flow. Because Fortress Coffee has higher margins and a magnetic brand, it converts a much larger portion of its revenue into cash that the owners can take out of the business or reinvest for growth. This is the financial engine that Buffett seeks. He isn't just buying a story, he is buying a quantifiable, cash-gushing economic machine whose durability is guaranteed not by a contract, but by its permanent residence in the mind of the consumer. This connection, from mental share to market share, from cognitive ease to gross margin, from brand loyalty to free cash flow, is the direct financial blueprint of a world-class long-term investment. If the American Express saga was Buffett's early lesson in the defensive power of a brand during a crisis, his acquisition of a small family-owned chocolate company in 1972 was his master's degree in the offensive power of a beloved brand to generate extraordinary returns. This was the deal that truly shifted his focus from buying cheap, statistically bargain-priced cigar butt companies to buying wonderful businesses at a fair price. It was the candy store that built an empire, and it was almost entirely the brainchild of his partner, Charlie Munger. The story of See's Candies is perhaps the single most important case study in understanding the financial transformation from a pure numbers-based investor to a qualitative, brand-focused genius. By the early 1970s, Warren Buffett had a stellar track record, but he was still operating firmly within the framework of his mentor, Benjamin Graham. He was looking for businesses trading for less than their net working capital, businesses that were so cheap they were a statistical certainty to be worth more dead than alive. But Charlie Munger had been pushing him, urging him to evolve. Munger argued that it was far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. The problem was, Buffett hadn't yet found the right opportunity to put this new philosophy into practice. Then, See's Candies came up for sale. See's was a California institution. Founded by Mary See in 1921, the company had built up a fanatically loyal customer base on the West Coast. Its black and white checkered stores were iconic. The brand was synonymous with quality, nostalgia, and special occasions. When you went to a dinner party, you brought a box of See's. For Valentine's Day, for Christmas, for birthdays, See's was the default choice. The business was offered to Blue Chip Stamps, a company Buffett and Munger controlled, for $30 million. The company had about $8 million in net tangible assets, the value of its factories, inventory, and stores. It was earning about $2 million after tax. Buffett's Graham-trained brain immediately saw a problem. The asking price of $30 million was nearly 4 times the company's book value. And it was 15 times earnings. This was no cigar butt. This was a premium-priced, high-quality asset. He and Munger flew out to California to meet with the See family. They liked what they saw. The business was simple, honest, and beloved. They offered $25 million. The See family held firm at 30. Buffett, still anchored to his old way of thinking, was ready to walk away over $5 million. He was about to let a life-changing investment slip through his fingers because he was too focused on the price tag and not enough on the value of the intangible asset, the brand. It was Munger who saved the deal. He forcefully told Buffett, "You're thinking about this all wrong. We are not just buying factories and inventory. We are buying a brand with untapped pricing power." Munger understood something profound about the business that wasn't on the balance sheet. Because See's was so intertwined with happy memories and gift-giving traditions, its customers were not particularly sensitive to the price. A person buying a 1-pound box of chocolates for a loved one wasn't going to quibble over an extra 50 cents or $1. The emotional value of the gift far outweighed the monetary cost. Munger convinced Buffett to pay the $30 million, though they ultimately negotiated the price down to $25 million. They bought the business. That $25 million purchase in 1972 has become one of the crown jewels of the Berkshire Hathaway empire. Over the subsequent decades, that little candy company has generated more than $2 billion in pre-tax earnings for Berkshire. $2 billion from an initial investment of $25 million, and crucially, it has required very little additional capital investment. The factories didn't need massive, constant upgrades. The real value, the brand, grew and generated cash all on its own. Buffett has often said that See's Candies taught him more about business and investing than almost any other deal. It was the tangible proof that an intangible asset, the affection and loyalty of its customers, could be the most valuable financial asset of all. It was the prototype for his later mega investments in brands like Coca-Cola, Gillette, and Apple. It was the candy store that provided the intellectual blueprint for building the most valuable corporation in the world. The magic of See's Candies is rooted in a powerful psychological principle known as the affect heuristic. A heuristic, as we've discussed, is a mental shortcut. The affect heuristic is a shortcut where our emotional response to a person, a place, or a brand, our affect or feeling about it, dominates our rational judgment. If we have positive feelings about something, we tend to judge its benefits as high and its risks as low. If we have negative feelings, the opposite is true. Our emotions make the decision for us, and our rational brain then scurries to find reasons to justify that emotional choice. See's Candies is a masterclass in leveraging the affect heuristic. The company isn't really in the business of selling chocolate. It's in the business of selling nostalgia, love, and tradition. The customer's decision to buy a box of See's is not based on a cold calculation of price per ounce or cocoa content. It is driven by a lifetime of warm, positive associations. It's the memory of their grandmother giving them a molasses chip. It's the feeling of walking into the clean, welcoming black and white store and being offered a free sample. It's the joy on a loved one's face when they receive that iconic white box. These positive emotions create an impenetrable shield against competition. A competitor like Russell Stover or Godiva can try to compete on price or on perceived quality, but they cannot compete with a customer's personal memories. They cannot replicate the decades of emotional goodwill that See's has built, one box of chocolates at a time. When the affect heuristic is this strong, price becomes a secondary, almost irrelevant consideration. In fact, a higher price can sometimes reinforce the perception of quality and the specialness of the gift. Trying to save a few dollars by buying a cheaper brand would feel like devaluing the emotional gesture itself. This is the essence of untapped pricing power. The company's ability to raise prices is limited not by its competitors, but only by the risk of damaging that precious emotional connection with its customers. As long as that bond of affection remains, the brand can continue to generate extraordinary profits. This insight that some brands have immense, untapped pricing power due to emotional connections can be systematized into a mental model for your own investing, the Untapped Pricing Power Framework. It's a 4-step guide to help you find the next See's Candies. Step 1 is to identify businesses that sell giftable or ceremonial products. These are items where the emotional payload is the primary reason for the purchase. Think of engagement rings from Tiffany & Company, champagne for a celebration, or a Disney World vacation for your family. In these situations, the buyer is not just acquiring a physical good or service. They are buying an experience, a memory, a symbol. The functional value is secondary to the emotional and social value. This is fertile ground for pricing power, as people are willing to pay a premium to ensure the moment is perfect. Step 2 is to analyze the brand's history and listen for customer stories. Look for multi-generational loyalty. Do you hear people say things like, "My father always wore this brand of watch," or "We've been buying this for Christmas for as long as I can remember"? Scour online forums, read customer reviews, and pay attention to how people talk about the brand. Are they using transactional language or emotional language? A brand that is woven into the fabric of family traditions has a level of loyalty that no marketing budget can replicate. Step 3 is to scrutinize the company's historical pricing patterns. Has the company been bold or timid in raising its prices over the past decade? Compare their annual price increases to the general rate of inflation. A company that has only raised prices by 1 or 2% a year may be leaving a significant amount of money on the table. They may be run by managers who are focused on volume instead of value and who don't fully appreciate the strength of their own brand. This timidity can represent a huge, latent opportunity for a more astute owner or for an activist investor. Finally, step 4 is the outrage test. It's a thought experiment. If the company announced a 15% price increase tomorrow, what would the customer reaction be? Would they be outraged and immediately switch to a competitor, flooding social media with their anger? Or would they complain a bit, grumble about the cost, but ultimately pay up? Because there is no acceptable substitute for that special occasion. The brands that pass the outrage test, the ones where customers would complain but still buy, are the ones with the deepest moats and the most untapped pricing power. This is the qualitative analysis that separates good investors from great ones. It's about understanding human emotion, not just financial statements. The opposite of this approach, the path of the 99%, is to get stuck in the commodity trap. Most businesses, and therefore most stocks available to investors, operate in a world where their product is largely undifferentiated from their competitors. They are selling commodities. A commodity doesn't have to be a raw material like oil or wheat. It can be anything where the primary basis for competition is price. Think of airlines, personal computers, or memory chips. When you fly from New York to Chicago, do you have a deep emotional loyalty to one particular airline? For most people, the answer is no. You look for the most convenient flight at the lowest possible price. The service is a commodity. Dell, HP, and Lenovo all make laptops using largely the same components from Intel and Microsoft. They are locked in a brutal, never-ending price war, with razor-thin profit margins. A memory chip made by one company is functionally identical to a chip made by another. The only thing that matters is cost. Investors who don't understand the power of brands are drawn to these commodity businesses. They look at the spreadsheets, they see a stock that looks statistically cheap based on its price-to-earnings or price-to-book ratio, and they buy it. They are trying to time the cycles, buying when the industry is in a downturn and selling when it recovers. This is an exhausting, high-risk game that is incredibly difficult to win consistently. They are constantly exposed to the brutal forces of supply and demand, to technological disruption, and to cutthroat competition. They are analyzing the winds and the tides of a hostile ocean, when they could instead choose to own the one bridge that crosses it. A brand like See's Candies or Coca-Cola transforms a product from a commodity into a unique, irreplaceable treasure. It takes the business out of the price war and places it in a category of its own, a category of one. The failure to distinguish between these two types of businesses is one of the most fundamental and costly errors an investor can make. The ultimate financial advantage of a business like See's Candies is best understood through the concept of return on tangible assets. This metric reveals the true magic of an asset-light brand. Imagine two businesses, each earning $10 million a year in profit. Business A is a steel mill. To generate that $10 million in profit, it requires a massive $100 million investment in tangible assets, blast furnaces, rolling mills, real estate, and heavy machinery. Its return on tangible assets is 10%, 10 million divided by 100 million. Furthermore, this machinery depreciates. The company must constantly reinvest a large portion of its profits back into the business just to maintain its current level of output, a process called capital expenditure or CapEx. Business B is See's Candies. To generate its $10 million in profit, let's say it only needs $20 million in tangible assets, its kitchens, stores, and inventory. Its return on tangible assets is a staggering 50%, 10 million divided by 20 million. And its capital expenditure needs are minimal. A candy kitchen from 1970 still works perfectly well in 2020. The brand does the heavy lifting, not the machinery. This difference is the key to compounding wealth. The steel mill is a capital-intensive business. It consumes cash. It has to run hard just to stay in the same place. See's Candies is a capital-light business. It gushes cash. After its minimal CapEx needs are met, it has a huge amount of free cash flow left over. When Berkshire Hathaway bought See's, They could take the millions of dollars in profit that the candy business generated every year and reinvest it anywhere they wanted, buying stocks, acquiring other businesses, or investing in government bonds. The original business, the candy company, continued to grow and produce more cash with very little additional investment. It was a golden goose that required almost no feeding. This is the financial holy grail that Buffett is always searching for, a business whose most valuable asset, its brand, is not on the balance sheet, requires no maintenance capital, and grows in value year after year, all while producing a torrent of deployable cash. That is the true financial legacy of the candy store that built an empire. One of the great ironies of investing is that the most powerful and reliable wealth-building machines are often the ones investors are most eager to abandon. We are drawn to complexity and novelty, and we dismiss the simple and the familiar as boring or unsophisticated. This leads to what I call the sin of simplicity, the costly market mistake of selling your best, most durable businesses far too early. You sell the proven winner to chase a speculative story. This mistake is not born from a lack of intelligence, but from a set of powerful psychological biases that are deeply ingrained in our nature. Overcoming this sin is one of the most difficult, but also one of the most rewarding challenges an investor will ever face. A perfect illustration of this principle, both in its observance and its violation, can be found in Warren Buffett's own history. In the mid-1960s, a young Buffett found a wonderful, simple, and undervalued business, the Walt Disney Company. He met Walt Disney himself, was impressed by the man's genius, and saw the incredible enduring value of the company's characters and films. He bought a significant stake in the company for his partnership at an average price of 31 cents per share, adjusted for splits. A year later, the stock had risen over 50%, and he sold it for 48 cents a share. He booked a nice, quick profit. It seemed like a smart move, but it was one of the biggest investment mistakes of his life. He has since calculated that the profit he gave up by selling that stake too early amounts to billions and billions of dollars. Why did he sell? He fell for the sin of simplicity. He looked at Disney, a business he understood perfectly, and made a quick profit. He then likely moved on to the next cigar butt, the next statistically cheap but mediocre business. He underestimated the long-term compounding power of a world-class collection of brands and intellectual property. He saw the short-term gain but missed the multi-decade journey of value creation. It was a lesson that stung him deeply, and one he would never forget. Contrast this with his investment in the Washington Post Company, which he began buying during the market crash of 1973-74. At the time, the entire stock market was in a state of terror, and newspaper stocks were particularly hated. But Buffett, looking past the panic, saw a simple and powerful business. The Washington Post had a dominant brand in its market. It was the essential morning read for the most powerful people in the world in the nation's capital. It had a local monopoly on news, advertising, and classifieds. It was, in his words, a local economic franchise. He bought a huge stake in the company for about $11 million, at a time when the entire company was valued by the market at just $80 million, even though he knew its assets were worth at least $400 million. It was cheap, but more importantly, it was a wonderful business. The key to this story is not the initial purchase, but what he did next. Nothing. He held the stock for over 40 years. Through recessions, through market booms and busts, through the dawn of the internet age which would eventually challenge the newspaper business model, he held on. He understood that the value was not just in the numbers, but in the brand's grip on its local market. That $11 million investment grew to be worth over $1 billion. He had learned the painful lesson from his Disney mistake. He had overcome the urge to snatch a quick profit from a simple, understandable business. He had conquered the sin of simplicity and embraced the profound power of long-term holding. He let the compounding machine run, uninterrupted, for decades. This urge to sell our winners, to abandon the simple for the complex, is driven by a pair of powerful psychological forces, action bias, and the narrative fallacy. Action bias is our innate, evolutionary preference for doing something over doing nothing, even when inaction is the more logical course. In the ancestral environment, if you heard a rustle in the bushes, it was better to run, action, than to stand still and analyze the situation, inaction. That bias towards action is hardwired into our brains. In the world of investing, it manifests as a constant desire to tinker with our portfolios. We feel that if we aren't buying or selling, we aren't being productive. The simple act of holding a great business for years feels passive and lazy, even though it is the most powerful strategy for wealth creation. The financial media feeds this bias, with its constant noise about what to buy now, what to sell now, creating a sense of urgency and a fear of being left behind. Compounding this is the narrative fallacy, a concept beautifully articulated by the writer Nassim Nicholas Taleb. The narrative fallacy is our tendency to be seduced by compelling stories. Our brains are not wired to understand raw data and probabilities. They are wired to understand narratives with a clear cause and effect. We crave a good story. When we compare two potential investments, we are unconsciously drawn to the one with the better story. Consider two options. Option A is Coca-Cola. The story is, people will continue to drink sugary beverages, and Coke has the best brand and distribution. It will likely grow at a steady, boring 6% a year. Option B is a new technology company, Quantum Leap AI. The story is, this company is using revolutionary artificial intelligence to disrupt a $100 billion industry. Its growth could be explosive, 1,000% or more. It could change the world. Which story is more exciting? Which story gets your adrenaline pumping? Almost everyone is more drawn to the story of Quantum Leap AI. It's a story of transformation, disruption, and immense possibility. The story of Coca-Cola is one of stasis. We equate the exciting narrative with a better investment and the boring narrative with a mediocre one. This leads us to sell the reliable, cash-gushing, simple business to buy the speculative, often unprofitable, complex business, simply because its story is more compelling. We trade a high probability of a good return for a low probability of a spectacular one, seduced by the power of a good tale. To combat these deep-seated biases, you need a disciplined, pre-committed strategy. You need an operational protocol for inaction. I call it the sit-on-your-hands protocol, a 4-step mental model to protect you from your own worst instincts. Step 1 is the 5-year test, which you perform times 4 times you buy a stock. When you are considering an investment, you must write down, in simple terms, the core reasons why you believe this is a great business. Then, ask yourself 2 questions. Am I highly confident that these reasons will still be valid in 5 years? And will they still be valid in 10 years? If the answer is anything other than a resounding yes, you should probably not make the investment. This test forces you to focus on durability rather than short-term momentum. The reason to buy Coca-Cola in 1988 is the same as the reason to own it today, a globally dominant brand in a simple, slow-changing industry. The reason to buy a hot-tech startup might be obsolete in 18 months. Step 2 is to implement a quarterly report detox. The obsession with quarterly earnings is a major driver of action bias. A great business does not become 20% more valuable or 20% less valuable based on whether it beat or missed an arbitrary analyst earnings estimate by a penny. This is noise, not signal. Instead of anxiously awaiting every quarterly release, commit to reviewing your holdings in depth only once or twice a year. Focus your attention on the long-term health of the business and its competitive moat, not the short-term fluctuations in its reported profits. Unsubscribe from the constant stream of financial news and give your investments the time they need to grow. Step 3 is to create a too-hard pile just as Buffett and Munger do. Consciously and explicitly define your circle of competence. What industries do you genuinely understand? For most people, this list is very short. It might include retail, consumer goods, or basic financial services. It probably does not include biotechnology, semiconductor design, or complex enterprise software. Be honest with yourself. Any business or industry that you cannot explain to a reasonably intelligent person in a few simple sentences belongs in your too hard pile. By pre-committing to not playing in these games, you protect yourself from the seductive narratives of industries you don't understand and eliminate a huge source of potential mistakes. Finally, step 4 is to conduct a pre-mortem before you sell a high-quality business. Our natural tendency is to look for reasons to confirm our decision to sell. A pre-mortem forces you to do the opposite. Imagine it is 1 year after you've sold the stock, and it has doubled in price. You must write a detailed story explaining what happened. Why did the business continue to thrive? What durable advantages did you underestimate? What short-term headwind did you overreact to? By forcing yourself to rigorously argue against your own decision, you can often uncover the biases, the boredom, the fear, the desire for action that are truly motivating your desire to sell. This process can be the crucial circuit breaker that stops you from making the cardinal sin of selling a great compounder. The path of the 99% is to embrace the polar opposite of this protocol. They are members of the cult of disruption. The average investor today is obsessed with finding the next big thing. They are constantly searching for the next Amazon, the next Tesla, the next Netflix. Their entire strategy is based on identifying and betting on disruptive technologies and business models. This leads to a portfolio that is in a constant state of churn, selling last year's story to buy this year's new narrative. They sell a profitable, dominant, and simple business like Procter & Gamble, which has been paying and increasing its dividend for over a century, to buy a speculative electric vehicle startup that has never earned a profit and may not exist in 5 years. Why? Because the story of disruption is more exciting than the story of durable dividends. This behavior was on full display during the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s. Investors sold proven, profitable, old economy businesses to buy any company with a .com in its name, regardless of its business model or lack of profits. When the bubble burst, trillions of dollars of wealth were destroyed. The same pattern repeats in every market cycle, whether it's clean energy stocks, 3D printing, or cannabis stocks. The names change, but the behavior is the same. Abandoning the proven for the speculative, driven by a compelling narrative. They are playing a game of buying lottery tickets, hoping for one big win, instead of embracing the certainty of owning the casino itself. The direct financial consequences of this behavior are devastating, primarily due to the hidden tax of turnover. When you constantly buy and sell, you subject your portfolio to a triple threat of value destruction. First, and most obviously, are capital gains taxes. Every time you sell a winning investment, the taxman takes his cut, typically 15 to 20% or more at the federal level, plus state taxes. This is a direct and immediate reduction in the capital you have available to reinvest. It's a massive, self-inflicted headwind. Second are transaction costs. While commissions are lower than they used to be, they still exist. More importantly, there is the bid-ask spread, the small difference between the price you can sell a stock for and the price you can buy it for. For an active trader, these small costs add up over time, acting like a constant friction that grinds down your returns. But the third cost, the opportunity cost, is by far the most significant. This is the cost of not being invested in a great business while it continues its multi-decade journey of compounding. Let's run a simple example. Imagine you invest $10,000 in a great brand-name company that compounds its value at a steady 15% per year. If you simply sit on your hands and hold it for 30 years, your initial $10,000 will grow to over $662,000. Now consider an alternative path. You are a more active investor. You buy the same stock, but after 3 years it has doubled and you feel smart. You sell it to lock in your profit, pay your capital gains tax, and then look for the next idea. Maybe you find another good one, maybe you don't. You repeat this process every few years. Even if you manage to achieve the same gross 15% annual return, the constant tax drag and the periods of being in cash between ideas will absolutely devastate your final result. Your final nest egg will be a fraction of the buy and hold investors. The real magic of compounding only happens over very long, uninterrupted periods. Every time you sell a great business, you reset the clock. The sin of simplicity doesn't just make you miss out on future gains. It actively destroys the wealth you've already built by needlessly inviting taxes and transaction costs to the party. The simple, boring act of doing nothing is the most powerful financial action you can ever take. For decades, the gospel of value investing, as written by Benjamin Graham, was anchored to the tangible. Value was what you could count, what you could touch, what you could liquidate. It was the cash in the bank, the inventory in the warehouse, the machinery on the factory floor. The most valuable assets, according to this worldview, were the ones listed clearly on the left side of the balance sheet. An investor's job was to calculate this tangible book value and then try to buy the company's stock for a significant discount to that value. This was a powerful and effective strategy for a long time. But in the second half of the 20th century, the nature of the economy began to shift. The true sources of economic value were moving from the physical to the intangible, and this required a profound evolution in thinking. Warren Buffett's investment in Coca-Cola in 1988 was the moment this evolution became undeniable. It was his grand statement that the most valuable asset a company owned might not be on its balance sheet at all. The stage was set by the dramatic stock market crash of October 1987, a day known as Black Monday. In a single session, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted by more than 22%, the largest one-day drop in its history. Fear and panic gripped the market. Investors were selling everything, indiscriminately. In the aftermath, even the stocks of the highest quality companies in the world were trading at bargain prices. Buffett, ever the opportunist, saw this as the sale of a lifetime, and the business that caught his eye was the Coca-Cola Company. He had been a consumer of the product his entire life. He famously drinks at least 5 cans of cherry Coke a day, but he had never owned the stock. Now, with the price depressed by the market panic, he began to look at it not as a consumer but as a business owner. What did he see? He saw a company that sold a simple, cheap product that was beloved by billions of people around the world. He saw a business that was remarkably consistent. A recession didn't stop people from wanting a Coke. A stock market crash didn't change its taste. The business itself was completely unaffected by the chaos on Wall Street. He looked at the financials and saw an economic marvel. The company earned incredible returns on its capital. It required very little tangible investment to grow. It produced enormous and ever-growing amounts of free cash flow. But the true insight, the core of the investment thesis, was about the brand. Buffett famously articulated it with a powerful thought experiment. He said that if you were to give him $100 billion and tell him to take away Coca-Cola's leadership position in the global beverage market, he couldn't do it. He then said that if you took away all of Coca-Cola's physical assets, all its factories, all its trucks, all its bottling plants, but you left him with the brand, that single word Coca-Cola and its logo, he could go to any bank in the world and borrow all the money he needed to rebuild the entire physical infrastructure from scratch. This was a revolutionary idea for a value investor. He was explicitly stating that the company's most valuable asset was not the billions of dollars of tangible property listed on its balance sheet. It was the idea of Coca-Cola that existed in the minds of billions of consumers. That intangible asset was the true source of the company's economic power. Armed with his conviction, Buffett began buying the stock aggressively. Between 1988 and 1989, Berkshire Hathaway invested over $1 billion to acquire a stake of more than 6% in the company. It was, at the time, the largest single investment Berkshire had ever made. The rest of the world, still reeling from the crash, was timid. Buffett was backing up the truck, buying a piece of what he saw as the most valuable brand on the planet at a moment of temporary fear. That $1 billion investment is now worth well over $20 billion, and it has paid Berkshire billions more in dividends over the years. It was the ultimate validation of his new philosophy. In the modern economy, the intangible had become more valuable than the tangible. The reason why the market offered Buffett such an incredible opportunity in Coca-Cola is explained by a cognitive bias called the anchoring bias. This is our human tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive, the anchor, when making decisions. In finance, investors have for generations been anchored to the tangible numbers on the balance sheet. Book value was the anchor for what a company was, quote, worth. It was concrete, calculable, and comforting. Intangible assets, like the value of a brand, are the opposite. They are fuzzy, difficult to quantify, and don't fit neatly into an accounting formula. Because investors, and the accountants who create the financial statements they rely on, are anchored to the tangible, they systematically undervalue the intangible. They see a company like Coca-Cola trading at a high multiple of its book value and instinctively conclude that it is expensive. They fail to recognize that its most valuable asset, the brand, is either completely absent from the book value calculation or is represented by an accounting plug number called goodwill that is poorly understood and often ignored. Buffett's genius was his ability to break free from this intellectual anchor. He mentally redrafted the balance sheet. In his mind, the line item for brand value was worth tens of billions of dollars, even if the accountants said it was worth zero. This allowed him to see that Coca-Cola wasn't expensive at all. It was actually incredibly cheap relative to its true economic worth. He wasn't buying the company's factories. He was buying its mental monopoly. This cognitive leap, from tangible thinking to intangible thinking, is one of the key separators between average investors and the world's best. The market is full of people who can build a complex spreadsheet, but it has very few who can accurately gauge the economic value of human emotion and habit. The opportunities lie in that gap. To help you make this same cognitive leap, you can use a checklist I call the financial footprint of a fortress. A powerful brand leaves clear tracks in a company's financial statements. You just need to know how to spot them. This is a 4-point checklist to help you quantify the intangible. First, look for consistent and high gross margins. The gross margin is the percentage of revenue left after subtracting the cost of goods sold. It is the purest measure of a company's pricing power. A company in a commodity business will have thin gross margins, maybe 10 to 20%. A company with a powerful brand that can command premium prices will have fat gross margins. Look for companies with gross margins consistently above 40, 50, or even 60%. This is the clearest financial evidence that customers are willing to pay up for the brand, not just the product. Second, look for low and stable sales, general and administrative, SG&A costs as a percentage of revenue. This line item includes all the costs of running the business outside of direct production, such as marketing, salaries, and research. A business with a weak brand has to constantly spend heavily on advertising and promotions just to get customers' attention. A business with a strong brand has a magnetic pull. Customers come to it. This doesn't mean they don't advertise. Coca-Cola certainly does. But their spending is more about reinforcing the brand than about desperately acquiring new customers. A lower SG&A percentage indicates an efficient, powerful business model. Third, demand high and stable return on equity, ROE, and return on invested capital, ROIC. These ratios measure how effectively a company is using its capital to generate profits. A truly great business can consistently generate returns of over 15% and often much higher. This indicates that the business has a durable competitive advantage, a moat, that allows it to fend off competition and earn profits far in excess of its cost of capital. A business that earns high returns without employing a lot of tangible assets is very likely a business built on a powerful brand. Finally, the ultimate goal is to find businesses that produce abundant and growing free cash flow. Free cash flow is the cash a company generates after accounting for the capital expenditures necessary to maintain and grow its asset base. It is the true owner's earnings, the cash that could be returned to shareholders through dividends and buybacks, or used to acquire other businesses. Great brands are cash machines. They require little capital to maintain, and they throw off enormous amounts of cash. This is the financial lifeblood of a compounding machine. A company that consistently checks all four of these boxes is a company whose brand is not just a marketing concept, but a powerful and quantifiable financial asset. The antithesis to this approach, the path of the 99% of so-called value investors, is to continue worshiping at the altar of price to book. They remain anchored to the old Graham dogma, searching for companies whose stock price is low relative to the accounting value of their tangible assets. This strategy, which worked well in the first half of the 20th century, is a trap in the modern economy. What kinds of companies trade at a low price-to-book ratio today? They are almost exclusively capital-intensive, low-return commodity-type businesses: steel mills, airlines, auto manufacturers, banks. These are businesses that are constantly forced to spend billions of dollars on new plants, new airplanes, and new technology just to remain competitive. They are locked in brutal price wars. They have little to no brand loyalty. They are asset-heavy, but profit-light. The investor who buys a steel mill because it looks cheap on a price-to-book basis is mistaking a melting ice cube for a bargain. They are buying the very opposite of a business like Coca-Cola or See's Candies. They are buying a business that consumes cash rather than one that produces it. They are focused on the price of the assets they are buying, without any regard for the value of the business's future earning power. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what creates long-term wealth. Now let's demystify how the accounting world even attempts to capture the value of a brand on a balance sheet. The key term is goodwill. When one company acquires another, the transaction is recorded on the acquirer's balance sheet. The acquirer adds the tangible assets of the target company, its cash, inventory, and factories, to its own. But almost always, the acquirer pays a price that is much higher than the fair market value of those tangible assets. Why? Because they are also buying the target's intangible assets: its customer relationships, its intellectual property, and, most importantly, its brand. The difference between the purchase price and the value of the tangible assets is recorded on the balance sheet as an asset called goodwill. It is, in essence, an accounting plug. It's the accountant's way of acknowledging that something valuable was purchased beyond the physical stuff. For example, when Kraft Foods acquired the British candy company Cadbury for $19 billion, it only acquired a few billion dollars worth of tangible factories and inventory. The vast majority of that purchase price, billions and billions of dollars, was recorded as goodwill on Kraft's balance sheet. That goodwill was the accounting representation of the value of the Cadbury brand, a brand beloved in the UK for generations. For many investors, goodwill is a mysterious and suspicious item, but when you see a company with a large amount of goodwill on its balance sheet, it can be a clue. It tells you that this company has a strategy of acquiring other businesses with strong brands. By analyzing the goodwill account and the acquisitions that created it, you can gain insight into a company's appreciation for the power of intangible assets. It is the financial ghost of a brand, a faint echo on the balance sheet of the powerful economic reality that lives in the customer's mind. Understanding this connection is a key step in learning to quantify the seemingly unquantifiable power of a great brand. The final evolution in this philosophy, the capstone of a 6-decade-long journey of learning, is the application of these principles to the most dominant and technologically advanced companies of our time. For years, Warren Buffett famously avoided technology stocks. He often said they were outside his circle of competence. He didn't know who would win the wars between competing operating systems or social networks. But then, starting in 2016, Berkshire Hathaway began making a massive investment in one of the largest and most successful technology companies in the world, Apple. To many observers, this seemed like a shocking departure from his long-held principles. But it wasn't. Buffett didn't invest in Apple as a technology company. He invested in it as the single most powerful consumer brand in the world. He was simply applying his time-tested principles to a modern fortress. Buffett's analysis of Apple had very little to do with the processing speed of the A-series chip or the pixel density of the Retina display. He wasn't trying to predict the next product cycle. Instead, he did what he always does. He observed human behavior. He looked around and saw a product that had become indispensable to hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people. The iPhone wasn't just a phone, it was the central hub of modern life. It was a person's camera, their navigation system, their music player, their communication device, their wallet. He saw an ecosystem of products, iPads, Macs, the Apple Watch, that all worked together seamlessly, creating incredible stickiness and high switching costs. He talked to people, especially young people, and saw the incredible brand loyalty. The iPhone was a status symbol, a fashion statement, an integral part of their identity. He saw a company with phenomenal pricing power, able to command prices for its products that were significantly higher than its competitors, who used functionally similar components. He analyzed it not as a tech gadget, but as a consumer product, just like a can of Coke or a Gillette razor. He saw a business with a deep and wide economic moat, built not on transitory technological advantage, but on the enduring power of its brand and ecosystem. He concluded that Apple was not a technology company in the traditional high-risk sense. It was a consumer products company whose product happened to be technology. It was the ultimate modern example of a brand acting as a toll bridge. Once a customer was in the Apple ecosystem, they would pay a small toll every few years to upgrade their phone, and they would continue to pay for services like apps, music, and storage. Based on this insight, Berkshire Hathaway invested tens of billions of dollars, building a stake that has since grown to become the single largest common stock holding in its portfolio by a massive margin. It was a stunning demonstration that the principles of brand value investing, honed on candy stores and soda companies, are timeless. They are just as applicable to the iPhones of the 21st century as they were to the traveler's checks of the 20th. The immense power of the Apple brand and its ecosystem is supercharged by two more psychological principles: the endowment effect and commitment, and consistency bias. The endowment effect is our tendency to irrationally overvalue things simply because we own them. In a famous experiment, participants were given a coffee mug and then asked how much they would sell it for. They typically demanded a price twice as high as what another group of participants, who did not own a mug, were willing to pay for one. Once the iPhone is * your FINCode TILS iPhone, filled with your photos, your contacts, and your FINCode TILS apps, it becomes more valuable to you than any other identical device. This creates a powerful emotional barrier to switching. This is magnified by commitment and consistency bias. We have a deep psychological need to appear consistent with our past decisions and commitments. Once we have bought into the Apple ecosystem, every subsequent purchase, an Apple Watch, a subscription to Apple Music, buying a movie on iTunes, is a small act of recommitment. It reinforces our identity as an Apple person. To switch to an Android phone would not just be a practical inconvenience, it would be a psychologically dissonant act. It would be an admission that all our previous choices were wrong. This creates a self-reinforcing loop of loyalty. The more invested a customer becomes in the ecosystem, the harder it is for them to leave. This is not a technological lock-in. It is a psychological one, and it is far more powerful. Apple has built not just a walled garden, but a fortress of the mind from which its customers have little desire to escape. You can use these insights to build your own forever portfolio by employing what I call the Consumer Toll Bridge Portfolio Strategy. This is a practical, four-step guide for constructing a portfolio of dominant, brand-driven businesses that you can confidently hold for the long term. Step 1 is to start with what you know. Identify your own personal can't live without brands. Open your kitchen cabinets, look in your closet, check your credit card statement. What products and services do you buy on a regular basis without even thinking about the price? What brands do your family and friends consistently use and recommend? This is your starting universe of ideas. Your own behavior as a consumer is a powerful research tool. If a brand has captured your loyalty, it has likely done the same for millions of others. Step 2 is to map the value chain. Sometimes the most powerful brand isn't the one on the end product, but the one that controls a crucial choke point in the industry. For example, while you might focus on different clothing brands, the real toll bridges might be Visa and MasterCard, who take a small slice of almost every retail transaction. While there are thousands of different food and beverage products in the supermarket, a company like Procter & Gamble or Unilever owns a huge swath of the most dominant brands on the shelves. Think about who owns the digital shelf space: Google, Amazon, the payment networks, or the essential ingredients. Step 3 is to apply the sleep at night test. Before you invest, ask yourself this question: if the stock market were to close for the next 10 years and I could not sell this stock, would I be comfortable owning this business? This test forces you to ignore short-term stock price fluctuations and focus entirely on the long-term durability of the business itself. Does the simplicity and strength of its business model give you a feeling of confidence and peace of mind? If the thought of being locked into a business for a decade terrifies you, it's probably not a true forever company. Finally, step 4 is to adopt a valuation framework for quality. The goal is not to find the absolute cheapest stocks, but to buy exceptional businesses at a fair price. Don't be afraid to pay a seemingly high price, say 20 or 25 times earnings, for a truly wonderful business with a durable brand, a high return on capital, and a long runway for growth. It is far better to pay a fair price for a company like this than to get a bargain price on a mediocre commodity-type business. Over the long run, it is the quality of the business that will determine your returns, not the cheapness of your entry price. This focused approach stands in stark contrast to the path of the 99%, which is the diversification trap. The average investor is taught that diversification is the ultimate safety net. They are encouraged to own hundreds, if not thousands, of different stocks, typically through broad market index funds and mutual funds. Or they build their own portfolio of 50 or more individual stocks, buying a little bit of this and a little bit of that, without a deep understanding of any of them. They mistake owning many things for being safe. Buffett's philosophy is the exact opposite. He has famously said, "Diversification is protection against ignorance." It makes very little sense if you know what you're doing. His strategy is one of focused, concentrated investment in a small number of businesses that he understands deeply and in which he has immense conviction. The diversification approach guarantees you an average result, minus fees. You own a little bit of the great businesses, but their performance is diluted by all the mediocre and terrible businesses you also own. The consumer toll bridge strategy is a pursuit of excellence. It is the conscious decision to own only the best and to own a meaningful amount of them. It is a portfolio built not on a spreadsheet of diversification, but on a foundation of deep business understanding and conviction. The ultimate financial connection, the culmination of this entire philosophy, is the power of long-term, uninterrupted compounding. The real financial advantage of identifying and holding these brand fortresses is that you give the eighth wonder of the world, as Einstein called it, the time it needs to work its magic. The numbers are truly staggering. A one-time investment of $10,000 in a business that can compound its value at 15% per year will grow to over $40,000 in 10 years. But the real magic happens in the later decades. In 20 years, it becomes over $163,000. In 30 years, it becomes over $662,000. And in 40 years, it becomes nearly $2.7 million. The key ingredient in this recipe is time, uninterrupted time. Every decision to sell a great business because you get bored, or because you get scared by a market downturn, or because you want to chase a hot news story, is a decision to interrupt this magical process. It is the cardinal sin that prevents the vast majority of retail investors from ever achieving true, lasting financial freedom. The powerful brands we have discussed are the source of the business durability that makes this multi-decade compounding possible. The brand is the moat that protects the business, allowing it to survive and thrive for generations, producing the consistent returns that fuel the compounding engine. Your job as an investor is simply to identify these fortresses, buy them at a fair price, and then have the patience and the conviction to let them do the work for you. You now possess the lens that separates Warren Buffett from almost every other investor on the planet. You no longer see just a product on a shelf. You see an economic fortress, an intangible asset living in the minds of millions, a cash flow machine built not on steel and concrete, but on loyalty and trust. You understand that the most valuable asset in the world is a small piece of real estate in the human mind. But understanding the what, the power of a brand, is only the first layer. The true genius of the Buffett system is how this principle interlocks with others. How does he determine the right price to pay for this fortress? What specific triggers tell him a brand is weakening before it shows up in the stock price? How does he use the gusher of cash from these brands to fuel other investments? The answers lie in the next piece of the map. The video that is now on your screen is not a random suggestion. It is the missing link. It's the component that connects the idea of a brand moat to the practical execution of capital allocation, a principle that turns the profits from Coca-Cola into the ownership of railroads and power plants. Most people will stop here, satisfied with this one powerful idea. But for those of you on a genuine path to financial independence, for the entrepreneurs and investors who aren't just collecting trivia but are building a mental arsenal, the journey continues. The choice to click is a choice to complete the blueprint. It's the next step in your ascent. Continue the mission.